So we move to the substantive item on the agenda, which is our governing body decision-making during the COVID-19 response period. And I'm going to ask Phil Wilson to come to the podium by the look of it. Now, can everybody just that's coming online check that their microphone is muted? We have had some noises coming through, still getting some noises coming through. I presume they're from people who are online. Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear that?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh,
we can.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, Phil, the floor is yours.
Kia ora koutou katoa. First, thanks for your forbearance as we get used to this different way of working. I can promise you there will be teething problems, but we are doing our best to make it work and greatly appreciate your patience. I don't need to tell you we're in a difficult and unfamiliar space, and hence we do need to suggest some significant changes to the way decision-making operates in the Council. We clearly need to be able to continue, the governing body needs to continue to be able to function effectively and make those decisions for the city. I might note that we have local boards and other decision-making processes sorted. The arrangements are now in place elsewhere. The reality is we can't do things normally. We have very real risk issues to deal with, hence your social distancing and the unusual arrangements today. We have the very real situation of senior staff not being able to support in the way that we normally would the operation of a committee structure such as we might normally have. A large number of committees, a large number of meetings, extensive agendas and such like. And in this environment, it's entirely appropriate to prioritise what businesses could be coming to you and focus on critical decision-making items. We developed a 4-stage process, but the reality is that we need to move quite quickly because within days, obviously, stage 1 and stage 2, as we'd envisaged to match the government's framework, are redundant. So we're going straight to what is suggested in the order paper. As the Mayor referred to, all councils are changing their arrangements currently. Some are implementing delegations such as you're used to around the election period and at Christmas, where mayors, deputy mayors, chief executives have a delegated decision-making ability. That is not what we're suggesting here. We think we can make this work, and we think it's absolutely appropriate in terms of healthy democracy and to accommodate your active interest and desire to participate in decisions at this important time, that we have a committee of the whole that you can all participate in. What is before you is a suggestion that we put all other committees on hold and that we focus all business other than a few items that are uniquely the prerogative of the governing body to this new emergency committee. Just a couple of points on it. There are matters where ordinarily the Independent Māori Statutory Board would have an ability to participate with 2 members. We recommend that that continue, and there's a recommendation to that effect with you. We're recommending discretion for the chair around public input. It's not to rule it out entirely, but it's to strengthen the standing order's ability for people to say, for the chair to say no, it's not appropriate given the nature of business and the unique situation we're in. It's also worth my noting, because some councillors have raised it with me, the suggestion around a quorum of 2. We're in a very interesting situation. We are expecting an order in council to change the provision that requires a quorum to be constituted of people who are physically here. That is a national problem and has been fixed on a national basis. So we are anticipating that into this paper. That said, when we started writing it, we were looking to minimise the number of people required to physically be here and felt 2 was the appropriate number. Even now, I'm recommending that is the number. The reality is that all members will have the ability to participate, and you will, but we need to envisage difficulties achieving that on occasion in the future, perhaps, and it is the legal minimum provided for in the legislation. So fairly straightforward, I would suggest. Mr. Mayor, I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you for you and the team who worked, I know, till late last night, because I was in touch with you at around 11 o'clock to make sure that this paper was in the shape that it needed to be in for today. I think, first of all, I'd like to move the recommendations to put them on the table. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Cooper. Now, if people who are online want to ask questions, and we'll have questions as normal first, and then we'll have comment, but if you can message in Skype that you are seeking a question or you're seeking a comment, and we'll try and see if that works. Sandra tells me that it will work. So no pressure, Sandra. If you want to ask a question, can you please identify yourself first, whether you're around this table or you're coming in electronically. That's important. So can I also just make this recommendation? Because it's much more challenging in the way that we're doing it today, it puts a much more emphasis on the need for us to be precise in our questions and our comments. So could I ask that of you too, please? The final comment I want to make at this stage is when we come to vote on these recommendations, to ensure precision, we'll take that vote by division, even if there is no division. So that's the way that I'm intending to proceed. So can I first of all ask for questions? We've got sorry, somebody's indicated. Councillor Casey.
Just said in the change to the legislation that will alter the quorum. When can we see that going through Parliament?
I was assured by the Minister yesterday morning that the order in council would have gone through yesterday, but we have not yet received the details of it. I think, Phil, we're expecting the details today. Is that correct? Yeah. What I have been assured is that the requirement under the Local Government Act for a quorum, which under our standing orders is 11 to be physically present, will not apply through this period. And that's, I think, probably the most important for the purposes of the paper we have in front of us today. Other questions, please? Why don't I just work my way around the table, then I'll come back to those that are online. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, question is, Phil, you mentioned the quorum of 2, and that there's no necessity for them to be here physically. Is that correct or not?
If you pass these resolutions, actually we will have to have the quorum here until we receive confirmation of the law change. In practical terms, if we get the advice of the law change tonight, then no.
Just another question, sorry.
Councillor,
Your
further
Worship.
question?
In regards to the Independent Māori Statutory Board membership, in regards to this, the Emergency Committee, if it gets passed, I note in the recommendation that they will still have a vote in regards to decisions that they would have if they were members of the standing committee or committees, and not if that report would normally go through to the governing body. how is that going to sort of be implemented from a process perspective if our agenda has items that have both? How is that implemented? Do they need to then leave the room if it's an item that the governing body would normally make, and then come back in when we go through? That's questions through there, and that's the last one. Thank you, Your Worship.
No, my intention would be to sit down with the chair, go through the agenda. They would not need to leave the room. This is typically not a conflict of interest situation. And while some decisions are the prerogative of the governing body and don't ordinarily involve the IMSB, oftentimes they will have been through a committee en route and they would have had an opportunity to comment, albeit not finally vote. So that is the principle we're trying to reflect in here. They are around the table, they have speaking rights. On a few matters, they won't have voting rights. I would intend to sort that out with the chair in advance so it happens in a clear and dignified fashion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Phil, for this paper. Just in terms of the E2, agree the Mayor and Deputy Mayor will be the Chair and Deputy Chair of the committee respectively. I don't wish to suggest the incapacitation of either the Chair or the Deputy, but I wish it on them. But I'm just wondering whether there does need to be an alternate there, of maybe it's a chair of a standing committee. And that was one question. And the other question was, is there an assumption that the chair or the deputy in the chair role are present at the meeting, physically present? It doesn't quite say that there. And my third question is, how do we ensure the chairs and deputies of the standing committees that have been working on work streams for some time that might now present at this emergency committee, how do we ensure that their knowledge is taken into account when papers come up? And is it clearly signalled that this work is formally the work of the Regulatory Committee or the Environment and Climate Change Committee, etc.?
Can I just make a brief comment on that in relation to the last point? I think if the paper is coming, say it's coming from the Planning Committee, it would be my intention as Chair to first of all ask the Chair of the committee from which the paper is coming to introduce the paper or ask questions on the paper. That would make sense, but I think we'll find our way through in a way that everybody feels is appropriate and fair. In relation to an alternate, I've got no problem if in the event that either the Deputy Mayor or myself can't be present, that we appoint somebody, and probably it would be a chair of one of the key committees. But Phil, you might like to comment further on those.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, the first point probably is sensible, and once I've spoken, I'll perhaps give some words to Sandra. We could simply add "or they're delicate" as advised. That would solve that. To the point about the Mayor and Deputy Mayor being physically there, no, we're not anticipating that would be a requirement. However, from experience, it is a lot easier to chair the meeting with some limited support around you, and that's a discussion we'll have with the Mayor about whether it's sensible to accommodate that. But no, it doesn't absolutely require it going forward. And I can't really add to the Mayor's point other than it would make sense for the chair of the committee from which the content was coming to lead the discussion.
Just on the latter point, Councillor, any member can drop out of an electronic conversation. I'm not quite sure where that's coming from, but perhaps somebody technically can check that noise. But would be my intention probably to chair from within the council building in semi-splendid isolation, simply so that I can ensure that the technology is there and is doing what it should be doing, and for that I will be very grateful for the assistance that I'll receive. If the chair goes down while the meeting is online, obviously the meeting falls apart and there's a lot of frustration and wasted time. But one further question, Councillor Darby.
Final, and that's my colleague, Councillor Filipaina, referred to the representation of the Independent Māori Statutory Board, and as in your opening comments, you talked about us all being in this together, and it's good to see the Independent Māori Statutory Board being invited to participate in this emergency committee. Is there scope, considering we might be canvassing matters that maybe are beyond the remit of former committees over which they had some participation and voting rights? I think it's physical and natural resources parameters. Is there scope there that we could actually be even more inclusive of the Independent Māori Statutory Board than maybe where we have extended in the past, considering us all being in this together?
I think that in terms of the inclusiveness of the Independent Māori Statutory Board, you will have noticed over the last 3 years I have extended their participation to the extent that the legislation allows me, and the decision that is before us today, which I support, to involve 2 members of the Independent Statutory Board at what would otherwise be, in many cases, a meeting of the governing body, will ensure that inclusiveness, and I think there'll be general support for that. Councillor Cooper.
Kia ora, Mr Mayor. Thank you. And just to note, 34C of the report says that if the Mayor or Deputy Mayor are not available, those able present will elect a chair for the meeting, so it just contradicts what you've got up there. So I guess if we're putting that up there, it's up to you to delegate, so that's fine. It was in the report in scenario 3. So my question is, given we have a quorum of 2, though I must, publicly state I trust you to implicitly to make good decisions, can you please enlighten me, in between that weekly meeting, if something comes up very quickly, does that then authorise you and the Deputy Mayor to make decisions without anybody else? In terms of being, not enable you to not publicly notify and just make a decision, because that's, I think, concerns people might have, that there isn't more input, in an absolute emergency within an emergency situation.
2 fair questions. On the first, it has got, as you rightly point out, under 34C, that if we're not available, and therefore there would be no chair, then it would be up to the meeting to appoint the chair. I don't think the foreshadowed amendment by Phil Wilson that we can also delegate a role, I think probably they are 2 separate issues. If there's going to be a new chair and neither the Mayor or the Deputy Mayor is there, then 34C says this body as a whole will elect its chair, and I think that's appropriate. On the question of 2, the quorum of 2, I put that question to Phil myself. In almost all foreseeable circumstances, this body will make decisions as the governing body would normally make decisions through this period of time. I worried about the question of a quorum of 2, but I think what that the answer I got from Phil, and he might like to expand on it to others, is in the event that, say, the communication system fell down and there was no other way of convening the meeting of people, then that would be where the decision-making lies. It's highly unlikely, but Phil, you might like to expand on that.
No, that's right. And outside of that, no, the Mayor and Deputy Mayor don't have the ability to make binding council decisions on behalf of the governing body.
We're not yet in the age of autocracy. We're in extraordinary circumstances, but not at that extraordinary. Councillor Young, did you have a question? I'll just go through. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've got 2 questions. One relative to Resolution L, and that is that we're giving you and the Deputy Mayor on the recommendation of the Chief Executive to decide the end period. I just wondered, we have been told by the government that this is a lockdown period for a month. Should we not put a month in there and then have a look at what that looks like following that period? Or at the moment, this is very continuous. And I'm just seeking the reason behind the openness of this as opposed to a review period.
Yeah,
That's my first
as you'll
question.
see, that decision would be made by the Mayor and Deputy Mayor on the recommendation of the Chief Executive. I'm happy if there was deemed to be a necessity to amend it, but as soon as we can get back to the normal manner of meeting, I'm keen for us to do that. And actually through the period of time, even within the first 4 weeks, if we find that both staff and the technology supports it, I would be keen to getting back to holding other meetings such as the Committee of the Whole as normal. So that the period of time in which we meet in the way that is recommended will be as short as our staff capacity and our technological capacity can allow for. And of course, as soon as Alert 4 is lifted, we would be able to go back to the normal meeting with a physical presence. But again, I'll invite Phil if he wants to add to further to that question.
Not much to add. It is written in the spirit of returning to normal as soon as possible and being agile in doing so.
Thank you. So that was clarification there. My second clarification is around P, public input. Now, we're trying to do business as usual in an electronic way. And my question is around the fact that you've said here you'll provide full discretion to the chair to decline public input requests. What are we doing to allow public input into our decision making in an open, transparent way? Are we saying to people, listen, if you want to talk to the council, email through your concerns or your paper? I just wondered how we were looking at that. Or are we saying, because this is the second question to my first question, which is a month of the lockdown. You see, if it was a lockdown, I understand that. But if it's an open period, the practicalities of what we are doing, I'm just trying to challenge that and say, how will we cope with that?
The terms of reference allow for that to happen remotely, electronically. So we would use that mechanism, not cause people to physically come in anywhere. I think the point is that it allows you to accommodate some requests to be heard, but it also gives you a strengthened ability to say no, given the very focused nature of this committee and the fact that it's dealing with urgent and critical business.
For supplementary, are you saying that members of the public can Skype in?
We're saying we are allowing for that possibility in the event that the chair decides it's good use of your time.
These meetings, of course, will be, this meeting right now, I understand, is being is online.
Yes,
Yeah, we will try to keep as open and transparent as we can, and that includes not ruling out the opportunity, even in these extraordinary circumstances, for the public to have an input, but allowing some discretion. And if there's 50 people that wanted to have an input because they are extraordinary times and there's lots of questions, then we need to have discretion to say, no, we can't just follow normal standing orders. We need to be able to conduct these meetings in an appropriate way. But I didn't want to close it off, and I didn't want to open it up so widely that we wouldn't be able to conduct the business because of the technical difficulties and the time taken.
Right, and my last question is, yes, how are we can't film these meetings if no one's here. So how is that being handled?
A technical question, Phil. What's your answer?
And I'm afraid I don't have a technical answer for you, but we will look at that practicality.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Hills. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Your Worship.
Attendance, first point. Second point, we're not envisaging normal audit and risk business will continue, but we don't know for how long this arrangement will be in place. And there are a handful of decisions that require their resolution on. For example, approval of annual report annual plan disclosure statements to the markets and so forth. So we just need to allow the opportunity for them to come together and do elements of their business if needed.
Thank you. Second question, just for clarification. So given that we are an essential service, will councillors be able to attend physically the meetings they have if they so choose?
We are not providing for that to happen, no.
I think the reason for that is the obligation that we face under the regulations that will be forthcoming is to minimise the people-to-people contact outside your normal family circle. If there was an extraordinary reason, for example, your phone system went down at home and you weren't able to participate electronically, or your internet went down, then we could make provision for that. My goal is that every councillor be able to attend, and I think we'd create a special circumstance around that. But my obligation is to say to government, to the extent possible, we are doing this through electronic means and not in person, but an extraordinary situation would overrule that norm. Thank you very much. Councillor Newman. No. Okay, look, what I'm going to do, thank you. I did go through every councillor, and thank you for those that forewent the opportunity to ask a question. I think I'll do it the same for those that are online, so that I know that I'm not omitting anyone. So don't feel obliged to ask a question, but if you have one, I'll go through now from alphabetically through those that are joining us online. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My questions were around whether staff are preparing any advice around you declaring a state of emergency, a local state of emergency, under the Civil Defence and Emergency Management Act. And then my other question was, I guess that's for Phil Wilson. My other question was around our duty as a local authority to provide a plan, a Civil Defence Emergency Management Plan, and where we're at with that, especially in regards to local boards and us as councillors, given that the Ministry of Health response is going to be quite high level. So what's happening locally? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Your Worship, can I request that we address those two questions in the briefing session afterwards?
Yep, I'm happy if Councillor Bartley, if you can, we'll go through some of the more general questions, and I also want to foreshadow I have 3 questions from Councillor Fletcher, who I don't think has been able to join us online, but I will.
No, I'm present.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Councillor.
Online.
So, Councillor, I'm suggesting that, as with Councillor Bartley, your questions would probably best be addressed by Ian Maxwell, if you're happy to hold those over to that point.
If I'm able to stay until that time, I'm very happy with that. I recognise that they're operational.
Okay, and if you're not able to be online for that full period of time, then
Can
perhaps
Ian
Maxwell could contact you directly in answer to the questions. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Collins? If I don't hear anything, I'll just jump straight to the next person. Okay, sorry, Councillor Collins, I've got you now. No, no questions.
No, I don't have any questions, thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Coombe?
No questions at this point, thank you. Thank you for the update.
Thank you. Councillor Dalton?
No questions, thank you.
Councillor Fletcher, I've talked to already. Councillor Mulholland?
Trying to get in. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you clearly. Did you have a question?
My question was operational around communicating when community are unable to get an answer on matters pertaining to work and so forth. So it's probably operational.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, no, if I get you to repeat that question when we get to the operational section. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Right. Just as per your request, Councillor Greg Sayers from Rodney, electronically and on Skype. and a pleasure to be able to support you this way, Mr. Mayor. I'll also thank you for your introduction to the meeting, and also thank you to Phil Wilson for his briefing paper. So my question is just a clarification question for the public who may be listening and local board members, and relating to item M in the resolution, just confirming that the understanding that providing there's legislative change, that people in the situation like we are now, dialing in electronically, will be able to vote, Mr. Mayor. That's the first question. I do have a second one.
Yep, I can absolutely confirm that. The undertaking that I have from the Minister is that the changes will be made in the order of council, in council, to allow that to happen, and that is absolutely our intention, that every councillor that may be joining us electronically will be able to have their vote counted.
Oh, terrific. And the second one is our briefing session with Mr. Maxwell following this. Is that a closed meeting, Mr. Mayor, or is that open also for local board members to listen to?
I was intending for it to be private to governing body members, but you know, if somebody felt strongly to the contrary, I'd be happy to listen to the arguments. But I think our preference would be for Ian Maxwell to be able to be as frank as is necessary in the circumstances, and maybe to give us advance notice of things that probably are not ready to be announced publicly yet. So my preference would be councillors only.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to have that briefing as well, Mr. Mayor. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stewart. I don't know that I've got Councillor Stewart online, so I'll move to the next councillor, Councillor Wayne Walker. Okay, and finally, Councillor John Watson. I'm not sure, I'm hoping that people haven't dropped out. John, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. If you'd like to put a question, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So thank you to Councillor Collins for lending me his ID number, else I wouldn't be able to get in here. So no, I haven't got any questions at the moment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. So that brings to an end question. Sorry, a further question from Councillor Filipaina.
Sorry, Your Worship, and I've got a comment in regards to the recommendation that we have here. Is this the appropriate time to ask that?
I'll move to comments straight after your question, if this is a question first.
That's going to be a question on the recommendations that are now on the paper, and also a question on the response that Mr. Wilson gave around the election of an alternate or a chair or deputy chair. If both yourself and the deputy mayor were not available to chair the meeting. So can I ask those two? Because I went...
Yep, please go ahead and I'll get Phil to address them.
Okay. So, Phil, on section 34, bracket C, and there's a response there in regards to what happens at the emergency committee meeting, and that is under, I think, approves the number 3 scenario. So you mentioned that it's not currently in the recommendations in regards to it, but it's spelt out very clearly that if the mayor or deputy mayor is not there, that the meeting will elect a chair. Is that still the case?
At the risk of confusing people,
yeah.
What you have in the recommendations is not a perfect match with the different scenarios. That was our framework for kind of working up. In point of fact, you could do either. The mayor or deputy mayor confirms a nominee, or the meeting elects it. Either is entirely workable, and it's for you to decide, I would suggest.
Okay, and the last question around the recommendations that we have on the table now, would it be appropriate, Phil W., that we have the recommendation added that scenario 3 as outlined, approve scenario 3 as outlined in our paper? So there is no confusion?
No, I don't suggest you do that. The wording in the draft resolutions and the totality of them has been quite carefully worked up, and I think I would like you to consider those as the recommendation, not confuse it with other content in the paper.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a clarification. I think on reflection that what we have in recommendation 34C is appropriate, and we don't need the amendment as on the paper or the delegate as advised. If neither the Deputy Chair or myself can be there, I'm happy to leave it to the councillors who are present to elect a person to chair that meeting. So if that provides the clarity you might be looking for?
Definitely, and that was going to be part of the comments in regards to saying that what we have in 34C is exactly what we should have, and not to have a choice, is just to have that one. So look, I won't be speaking during this now that clarification's been done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, we come now to
I did have a question, Phil.
Oh, sorry. We have Councillor Walker here. Yeah, please put your question.
Sure. I'm making the assumption that our standing orders still apply in terms of putting out an agenda ahead of the meeting and so on. Obviously, that'll be electronic. Is that the case? And how do things apply if there's something particularly urgent that comes up?
Yes, an agenda will go out prior to the meetings, and there will still be the opportunity for people to bring an extraordinary item as is catered for under standing orders. Phil, anything you want to add to that? Thank you, Councillor. I have another question from Councillor Darby.
Just for clarification, the point I raised earlier had an amendment. That's fine. I read 34C2, but that's in the narrative of a report. It's not a resolution, and that's a big difference. So I just want to have some clarification again from Phil, leaving it as it is. It's now been unamended. Look, we often come across this. What might be in a report is not what we necessarily resolve. What we're resolving is on the screen, and that's what binds.
I think I can help you, Councillor. Probably the way to do it, because I thought there was some inconsistency between the first effort at the amendment, is that we could say, agree that the Mayor and Deputy Mayor will be Chair and Deputy Chair of the committee respectively. In the absence of either being available, those able to be present will elect a chair for the meeting. So if I can, Sandra, if you've got that, we'll put that in.
That's fine.
Thank you. Further question, Councillor Simpson.
Your Worship, I'm sorry, I think Councillor Stewart's having trouble dialing in, so she's emailed a question, if I may ask on her behalf.
If you could ask that question on her behalf, please.
Thank you. So she has written, declaration being made, response are covered by Civil Defence Management Committee and the National Civil Defence Management Act cannot be moved by another committee. Could I have confirmation that this is correct?
We have taken advice on that, and it is appropriate that this committee absorb the functions of that committee. I can ask Danny, if needed, to speak to that further.
Yeah, I think maybe someone should speak to the councillor, because she's gone on to say those functions and powers will revert to the Civil Defence and Emergency Management Committee when the Emergency Committee is deemed to be discharged in accordance with Clause 1. So
that's absolutely correct.
We will clarify that outside of this meeting with the Chair.
Thank you, and come back to Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you. We come now to comments, and I think I'll do it by way of reading through the list again. If you don't need to make a comment, please, you'll be giving assistance to us if you abstain. If you need to make a comment, you're very welcome to. So I'll run through the list, and again in alphabetical order for those that are joining us electronically. Councillor Bartley.
I have no comments. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
I have no comment as well, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Coombe.
Kia ora, no comment from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dalton.
Hi, no comment from me. Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
I just want to thank everyone for being able to allow all of us to participate in the meeting today and to convey my support for the draft resolutions, but also a desire that at some point there be a discussion around whether we should actually put general elections on hold and allow for the way in which the different parties must work together, because the Prime Minister has acted admirably, in my opinion, and has represented us, and I've been sitting in my hospital bed watching it avidly. But I think that the recommendations today are a good first step, and I think we'll probably need to go further.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher, and I think I'd be conveying the best wishes of everybody for a swift recovery. You sound remarkably recovered already. On the question of the election, we have great powers on this council, but one of them does not include the ability to defer the election. Reading the body language, the Prime Minister is leaving that question open to see what the situation might look like closer to the event. It would be quite a big deal to defer the election, and I'm sure if a decision were to be made in that respect, it would be made in consultation with the Leader of the Opposition. I think the best thing we can do in these current circumstances is to recognise the enormity of the crisis and to say party politics is way down the list of things that should influence our response to it. I think everybody would agree with that.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Mulholland.
Hi, kia ora, thank you, Mr Mayor and those present. I do support the resolutions. However, I would also like to get clarity on the questions posed by Councillor Stewart as I sit on that committee as well. Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you. Now, you're happy to talk directly to the chair of the committee, Phil, in response to the legal advice you have on how the two interact, but the advice that we have is that other than audit and risk, which will need to be treated separately, the committee of the whole for the governing body, the emergency committee, would subsume the powers of all other committees, but at the point at which we come off alert 4 and we can resume normal business, then those powers would revert to each of the committees individually. Is that correct?
We will do that between Danny and I will communicate with the committee.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of comments. I support the recommendations in full. I'm pleased with the way the technology has worked today, although it'll be our first time. I'm sure that the hiccups will be worked out, but congratulations to those involved. It's very important that all of us show leadership at this stage, Mr Mayor, which is coming through strongly in my eyes. We must continue that. And also, I'd just like to add that it's very important to embrace our local board members as part of that leadership role. Those are my comments.
Thank you very much, and I'm very conscious of the importance of your last comment, and we'll do our very best to keep our local board chairs and members right up with what we're doing. And in fact, that's something I'd request of officers as well as my own office, that when we do something, we had a Skype session last Friday. Hard to follow how quickly time has gone the last week, where local board members were invited to join and were informed. Now, I don't know whether we've got Councillor Stewart back with us yet. Maybe not. Apologies to Councillor Stewart if you're listening to the session, if you can't get through. Councillor Walker?
Yes, I'm here. And I certainly support the recommendations. I make an observation, and that is I'm assuming that the types of resolutions that we're making are also similar to those of other states around New Zealand. And certainly state that they are appropriate for a region as large as ours.
I can't comment on what other councils have done. I know that there would be a variety of different options being chosen, but local government New Zealand is endeavouring to provide some services in coordinating, but of course each council will make its own decisions as to what governance structure it adopts through the critical period. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Nothing additional to add to the comments that have been made by councillors. Happy to support the recommendations as they appear. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the comments from those here, I'll just run around the room, I think. Deputy Mayor Cashmore, no. Councillor Casey, no. Councillor Filipaina, no. Councillor Darby, no. Councillor Cooper, no.
Premier, and all of our staff, the amount of work and the lack of sleep that you've all had over this time, I really thank you for all that work. We can't do something like this without all of your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I can say, however, that 6 of the events that I had last weekend were all cancelled because of the curb on large gatherings, but I managed to find 3 or 4 to replace them with involving the media. Councillor Young. Councillor Simpson.
Look, I'll just take a brief moment to say I think it's important as, you know, one of the many governors of this region that we keep democracy in play and we do what we need to do, bearing in mind the confines that the government is putting on all of New Zealand as a result of COVID-19. I think we want to act appropriately. And I think now's a good time to recognise the importance of upgrading our IT system last year. But I think the staff have done a great job, and I'm sure this will work one way or the other. I'm heartened by the fact that you will try as quickly as possible to get out of this emergency committee and go back to our other committees still using technology. But at the end of the day, we certainly have a month of this, I would assume, potentially anyway. So look, well done to everybody. Phil, actually, you've done a great job, and Stephen, and let's get on with keeping Auckland moving and working as we should, even though we have challenging times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Hills.
Just a quick thank you to everyone here. And I know that everyone probably has massive stress on them, their families, and those around them with yesterday's pretty significant decision. You know, I just want to put out the thoughts to all our bus drivers and everyone else doing the work out there, and also the Prime Minister and the Director General of Health and everyone else just rushing around trying to do what they can. And if we can keep trying to push through the messages from the government, I think it's the safest way. But yeah, this is significant, and if we just keep supporting each other, it will be, we'll get through it. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hills. Councillor Henderson and Councillor Newman.
Well, you just quickly, Your Worship, I too want to echo the sentiments in relation to thanking our staff in working to ensure continuity during this extraordinarily difficult time, to thank colleagues. I think that with respect to the issue, the duration of these extraordinary arrangements, that needs to be dictated by the alert level status as determined by Cabinet, and I would expect that these arrangements need to be prepared for these arrangements to apply for longer, although obviously people want these arrangements to be shorter. They'll have to be determined by what Cabinet dictates. I support paragraph 34C. I think it adequately addresses the process, but I do want to say, Your Worship, that I think that beyond that, there is a need for the perception, and the perception for Aucklanders around business continuity means that in terms of leadership of this council, you are the leader and Councillor Cashmore is the deputy leader. Those leadership arrangements need to be on display at all times. So if you are available to chair these meetings, I think that is critical. If you're not, Councillor Cashmore, if you can be available, that is critical, because I do think it sends a very good message around leadership at this most extraordinary time. So you have my full support.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and I think I can assure you, probably for the Deputy Mayor as well, that we feel the responsibility of our positions at this time. Council cannot simply be an observer of events that are happening. We need to work really closely with central government, but not only central government, also the NGOs and the business community. I can mention to you, because it came up in a recent discussion, I've been on the phone, for example, to Chris Farrelly, the Auckland City Missioner, because we're all aware that we may all be affected by this crisis, but there is another particular point of concern, which is those that are are homeless at the present time. They are the most vulnerable to fall prey to this virus, and the transmission of this virus through that community could be severe. And we're working closely with people like Chris Farrelly, which I know Councillor Casey was keen to see that we were doing. I will work regularly over the coming weeks with sector leaders in each of the communities to feed back information to government, but also to convey some of those messages. I said earlier that it's not my job to reinterpret the expert opinion coming from the Ministry of Health. It's my job to observe what the recommendations are, unless there's a very strong reason to the contrary. But we will be looking at, one, maintaining our essential services, absolutely critical in regard to fresh water, wastewater, stormwater, critical in regard to the core services for Auckland Transport, critical in regard to waste, critical in regard to animal management. But we will also be looking at how the staff that we have freed up can work alongside the central government agencies that may be overwhelmed by the nature of the pressures that were placed on them. I'm thinking in particular the District Health Board, where we are working with the District Health Board to try to provide our staff with the skills that we have to supplement what they are trying to do. And equally, at the time of the last crisis, which was the partial power blackout with the Tempest, through our Auckland Emergency Management, we provided assistance to those, welfare assistance to those that were adversely affected. This time, because of physical contact constraints, we'll need to do it differently. But I envisage that we would want to, as a council, as well as I would urge every individual to do what we can to make sure that people who are subject to physical isolation are also not socially isolated. All of us will know people that have been recently bereaved, people that are living on their own, people who are elderly, and he waka eka noa is really important. We're all in this together. We need to support ourselves at this time. So thank you for your encouraging comments. Right, we'll come to vote on the resolution, and because of the participation online, I recommend that we take this vote by division, even if there is no division. So I'll ask our committee secretary to please take the vote. The recommendations, I need to add one other thing. I'm going to take recommendations A through to L, and then I'm going to take recommendations NOP separately, because they require a 75% voting approval. And then have we got another recommendation, I think, over page. So if I can take A to L and P and Q together, and then I will take M, N, O, P separately. So A to L and Q first. All those in favour? Oh, sorry, we'll read the division list.
By division.
Councillors, we're going to go by division. We're going to take this slowly so that we get everybody's vote recorded correctly. Could you please use your microphones when you are voting so that everybody can hear what that vote is? Mayor Goff.
Yes.
Councillor Bartley.
Yes.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Yes.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Coombe.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Dalton.
Yes.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Filipaina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
Aye.
Councillor Henderson.
For.
Councillor Hills.
Aye, thank you.
Councillor Mulholland.
For.
Councillor Newman.
Aye.
Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Simpson. Councillor Stewart?
4.
Yay. Councillor Walker?
Yes.
Councillor Watson?
Yes.
Councillor Young?
Yes.
That's unanimous.
Thank you very much, councillors. I declare that part of the vote passed unanimously. I'm now going to put separately recommendations M, N, O and P. So we'll probably need to do that division again, if I can ask you to call the list.
Councillors, you're voting on clause M, N, O and P. Mayor Goff?
Yes. Yes.
Councillor Bartley?
4.
Councillor Casey?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore?
Yes.
Councillor Collins?
4.
Councillor Coombe?
Aye.
Councillor Cooper?
Or
Councillor Dalton?
Yes.
Councillor Darby?
4.
Councillor Filipaina?
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher?
4.
Councillor Henderson?
4.
Councillor Hills?
Aye.
Councillor Mulholland?
4.
Councillor Newman?
Aye.
Councillor Sayers?
In support?
Councillor Simpson?
or
Councillor Stewart?
4.
Councillor Walker?
Yes.
Councillor Watson?
Yes.
Councillor Young?
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Thank you very much, councillors. The remainder of the resolution is also passed unanimously, so I declare the recommendations as a whole carried. And can I thank everybody? I think that it really is important at a critical time that we're facing at the moment, totally unprecedented, that we do come together, we work together in the interests of our city and together with the rest of the nation. So I thank you for that vote supporting a way forward to ensure that we have continuity in our governance arrangements. And we will continue to hold these meetings on a weekly basis. I think our intention is still to hold a governing body on Thursday to further test actually a situation where we will all be working remotely, or all councillors will be working remotely, and we'll get through the business we need to there, and again we'll continue to update councillors on our response and to get your feedback, because while you won't be out in the community physically, you'll still be getting feedback, and I think it's really important as part of our role that we provide feedback to all of the agencies that are dealing with this crisis. We come now to recommendation to item number 12, which is consideration of extraordinary business. None has been called for. So I will close the meeting, but ask councillors to stay online and in a closed session, I'll ask Ian Maxwell to come forward and just give us an update on the latest information on Council's response to this COVID-19 crisis. I'll just let you pause for a moment while we just check that the doors are closed and we're now offline to the public. A sec.